Hey there, I'm Taz Singh, and I've been working with communities for as long as I can remember. Fundamentally, communities are made up of people, so this is my journey going to those communities and talking to those people. Come along with me. Amazing, I'm back. Brian Vaughn. I've been following this guy for ages. He's got one of the cutest cats, and I love cats. It just reminds me, when I look at your cat, it reminds me of my cat, and that just warms my heart so much. I came to know about Brian through my good friend Ricky. So they both used to work together back in New York, and yeah, it's just a pleasure kind of meeting Brian in person, for, I guess for the first time here down at Reactathon in California. So the weather's beautiful. We're both dying of heat.
Yes.
Are you from a cold climate as well?
No, I grew up in Virginia, which had the full spectrum, winters and summers. But then I lived out here for most of the past 8 years, so
so you're kind of used to this.
Mostly I am, but I've been in New York for the past 7 months, and it's not this warm, and so I didn't bring the wardrobe for this. So yeah, it's been pretty warm.
I'm dying. I'm like me a Canadian. I'm just dying in this weather, dying in Miami. Just not for me. I prefer like cold climates where I can just layer up, But yeah, I got to know Brian, had a good chat with Brian, and so he's been up to some really crazy stuff. So I guess I came to know him through his react-virtualized work, all of his React dev tools work. I mean, all of those things have really helped me kind of build great applications before. But talking to Brian more, that's not where he started. That's not kind of where he begun. Obviously, that's what he's known for now. But you were telling me you started like way back, like 20 years ago even.
Yes.
And what, building PHP sites?
Yeah, so I wanted to go to art school, but it was too expensive. So I went to a state school instead. It's a little cheaper. And I needed to find something to do to pay my way through school. And so this was back 2000. I mean, I think I started in 2001, and the web was it was different back then. And so a lot of businesses didn't have a website yet, or they had bare minimum. And so I just started cold calling businesses, and I went by in person and I dropped off business cards that I'd made myself, and I just said, I can build you a website. You probably should have one. And it was very easy back then. People would just say, sure. So I did a lot of websites for local businesses, and then eventually one of them asked the inevitable question. They wanted something interactive, and I said I could definitely do that. I had no idea. And so I bought a book, learned PHP MySQL, and taught myself over the course of a week, and I would probably be very embarrassed to look at that code now, but yeah, and it was really fun. And so I finished out college doing that, and then by the time I graduated, I thought I'd rather do this than the art stuff, the graphics design stuff. So that's just like a side thing.
That's awesome. So I guess I have two questions for you.
Sure.
One is like, how did you essentially did those businesses understand what you were doing? Like, were you able to charge enough, or was that a constant kind of battle? Because at least like for me, I started just building websites for people as well, mind you, several years later, and I found like none of them kind of appreciated how much time, effort, and energy goes into making a website. They were all kind of like lowballing me on everything, and just getting them to bill appropriately and like justifying my invoices was such a difficulty.
Yeah, no, that's a big concern. No, to be honest, I undercharged by a lot.
Okay.
It was still a lot of money for me at the time.
Right.
Because I didn't grow up in a very wealthy situation or area, and so. But looking back, I was undercharging, and a lot of the businesses was like almost a barter system. Actually, the last 2 years of college, I lived rent-free because I built and then maintained the website for the company that owned a couple of the apartment communities, including mine, and they probably, honestly, it was off the books on their side, but they're like, well, in exchange for rent, you can do the website. And so it was early days. I don't think you could do that now.
The beginnings of Facebook Marketplace, everyone, right here, right now, just for you. That's awesome. And like for me, I used to build PHP MySQL apps back then as well. And I'm like thinking about that now, just thinking about knowing what I know now and applying it to like all the stuff I built back then. I'm like so embarrassed because like there's probably so many security flaws. Like I'm not sure if you remember, but like Apache used to like rewrite the variables as PHP variables, and you used to like directly refer to variables in your PHP being rewritten from the query string through Apache, and like now that's just a massive security flaw. And so back then, that's just how we wrote things. It's like I'm curious if you think back to any of those and are just like cringing as hard as I am.
No, not to that probably specifically. It feels
Oh,
really
so
far
so
back.
so it's basically only me, Brian. Okay, so it's only me. I get it. I
My
get
memory's
it.
just
Okay,
bad. I don't
okay.
think back to that. No, I do think back sometimes to. I mean, the web was very different. I mean, that was. I think I did my first open source project in 2004,
Oh wow.
and it was a PHP thing. It was
Oh cool.
a little framework for making CRUD apps because the company I was working for at that point, by that point, did contracting services, and it was like we were doing the same pattern a bunch, and so like it was a little. It wasn't JSON config, but it was an equivalent in PHP where you described the data, and then the thing I built like generated the CRUD pages, like the filter, sort, create, edit, template stuff.
That's pretty
And it was on
sophisticated.
SourceForge. No one uses this anymore, but that
Yeah.
was the GitHub of the time, and that was like this is fun. I want to do more open source, but there was 5 people that knew who I was back then, so it was a long journey to get to any.
That's crazy.
Level
Wow.
of
So
success.
you're involved in open source on SourceForge. Like that's a way back playback right there.
Way back.
That's awesome. So okay, so you did a bunch of PHP, MySQL.
Yes.
You kind of learned the LAMP stack, and then what? Like how did you go from there to the next point of your career?
Yeah, so Flash was very popular back in those days, and this was 2005 or 6 maybe. It was around the time when Adobe did this big relaunch of Flash to take from ActionScript 2, which was kind of more of a plaything, to ActionScript 3, which was more enterprisey, and they had a lot of things built on top of it. And it was based on the ECMAScript spec, similar to JavaScript syntactically, but JavaScript was very in its infancy back then too. So I joined a company called Rosetta Stone, which is a language learning company. Maybe folks remember them from the commercials. And we built a desktop that we distributed by CD for a while, which was fun. And then eventually web and mobile. And we built a lot of our stuff on the Flex Flash stack.
Yep.
And so I went from PHP to doing mostly ActionScript.
I mean, it's surprising to me that like back in those days, that stack was still so performant. Because it kind of compiled everything down to bytecode that ran on the Flash VM, and like that was so incredibly performant. I'm not sure if we've managed to get back to that level of performance with like modern JavaScript tooling. Like at times I question it.
I was a little sad when it became writing was on the wall. Because there were a lot of things that I think JavaScript has since caught up and surpassed in many ways, but there are a lot of things that felt like a step back when I think I went. An early Angular version was like the first thing I did after like post ActionScript days.
That's interesting because like I think like essentially I think of Angular as kind of the successor in a lot of ways to Flex and to Flash because like the paradigm that you use in Angular it seems very kind of inspired by, very reminiscent of Flex. So did you find it was a natural kind of transition or?
I don't remember the transition point. I do remember things like suddenly I lost a lot of nice IDE tools and like refactoring tools and a lot of like type safety things because this was pre any of the static analysis tools. And so I remember those sort of quality of life detractors. And then I also remember losing things like proxy and some classes that I'd come to depend on for some of the stuff and like there's no equivalent. Also back in these times, JavaScript or browser compatibility was a different story and it was a lot of a headache. Compared to now, I mean, it still exists, but much less so.
But like it's essentially like you've written some Angular, like Angular 1. So can you explain to the viewers what E-type transclusion is?
Oh boy, no! All of my Angular knowledge is gone. Angular was actually a little fun side story. I did an open source form abstraction library in Angular, and that was how I first met Kent, because he did one too. And I remember him and me and one other person whose name is escaping me now got together on a few calls and talked about combining our libraries into a framework agnostic thing that we would have little adapters to that we never finished doing. But that was, and that goes back, I don't know, 10 years maybe. Not quite that long, I don't know. That goes back a ways.
Oh, wow.
8 years at least.
That's a long time ago. That's a long time ago.
So Kent and I have bumped into each other a lot over the years.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
So you worked at Rosetta Stone. You worked on Flash, ActionScript, Flex. You moved into Angular at the end of that as well?
Towards the end, yeah. Towards the end of the last project I did, we had a Ruby backend and an Angular front end, and then I was doing that, and then one of the engineering managers that I really respected left and went to a startup, and I was interested in it, and so I left and went and did that for a bit, and it was also Angular, I think. I'm a little fuzzy on that. And then at that point, a friend of a friend that was at Google reached out, worked on Google Maps, and was like, hey, we're hiring, would you be interested? And I thought, well, that'd be really fun. And so I ended up switching and going to Google for a bit and trying the big company thing. Rosetta Stone was definitely medium. It was never big.
Right,
engineering-wise,
right.
especially, there were never maybe 200 of us max in the IT. It was
still, yeah, as you said, medium size. It's not like
Medium-sized.
it's not like huge. It's not Google.
Yeah,
It's not Meta
it
or
was a
Facebook Meta.
very different, very intimidating experience going from that to Google.
I bet, and like Google hires so many talented engineers that I mean, just being in their proximity, where you have people that have like written programming languages that have invented web standards that are like kind of understand kind of the stack so many levels deeper than my knowledge kind of ends at, and to kind of be in the same room as them, you're just kind of like essentially I'd imagine you're just kind of absorbing a lot of the time and.
Yeah, I was doing that. I was also overwhelmed and intimidated pretty badly for a while. I think that was one of the two hardest career transitions have been Google and Facebook.
Yeah.
In both cases, I was very overwhelmed and intimidated for the first, for the first year, honestly. Like,
oh wow.
Facebook was.
But like you mentioned that you had a friend at Google that kind of onboarded you into Google.
Friend of a friend.
A friend of a friend.
And that's nice because that kind of gets you farther along in the interview process. Like you can skip the initial phone screening. It was one of those things. But you still had to go and do the full site on day, like the full day on site rather, and do the coding things. And so that was still very intimidating. And then
I bet, yeah. So you went to Google, and then did you get to Facebook?
No, I did a startup called Treasure Data in between.
Oh,
and
okay.
Treasure Data was my first exposure to React, I think. But we were writing a front-end interface so Treasure Data is a big data company, and so we were building a front-end interface that basically is a way for you to write queries and sort of sort and filter data and make reports and stuff. And so this was a React app, and we started off using Facebook's fixed data table, which had a bunch of features that didn't really work the way we wanted. And I made an offhand comment to a coworker that I think I was the tech lead on this project, and I said, this does not look that hard. I could build this thing and add these features we want. And I was met with intense skepticism. And so I went home that weekend and I built version something of what would eventually be React-virtualized. And
oh my God, amazing.
Internally, we swapped out fixed data because at first it had a very similar API, so it was just a swap out. And then I gradually learned that like it's a very deep pit.
It's an incredibly deep pit. I mean, to build a virtualized table. I mean, there's so many concerns. There's obviously the scrollability. Like that's obviously the primary concern, and making sure that you have the data kind of loaded into view. But sorting is a huge challenge, isn't it? Like I mean, and then how do you measure what to put into view with kind of dynamic height? Kind of rows.
That's a big one. Dynamic content is a big one. Searching is another thing. That's like not even you don't think about it, but find in page doesn't work. There's a lot of like built-in accessibility features that don't work correctly for a virtualized list. And so there were a lot of things that I quickly discovered. The first version, so Treasure Data's use case was fixed height rows, and so that was very easy compared to
like dynamic.
Compared to dynamic height stuff. But it was fun. It was a fun experience. It was definitely a fire hose of stuff. But then I thought, okay, well, React was still new, and so I thought, okay, well, there's all of these things that we use here that we need, that there aren't clear existing solutions for. So I started spinning out some open source things. I did some Redux stuff, like a Redux search, I think it's called, and then I did a search plugin for the Redux DevTools, and I started pushing these things out because we found them useful. And then and it was early enough that I guess when people started searching, they found these first. That was the only reason. But I think Dan noticed a few of these and tweeted about them, and that's how I met him, and we chatted a little bit on Twitter, and then eventually sort of met Andrew and Sophie and some other folks, and that was what led me, I don't know, a half year maybe later. I remember I got a call from Christopher Shadow, who had just started managing the team, and said, hey, you're doing virtualization. We're thinking of tackling this. Do you want to come do it for us? And I said, yes, that would be cool. And so I started the Facebook interview process, which was also terrifying. And then between that and when I accepted an offer, Shadow had left the team, and this other person that I didn't know, Tom Aquino, who's awesome, but I didn't know him.
Tom's amazing.
Took over, and then I thought, well, okay, the person who recruited me is gone, and there was a bit of uncertainty about whether I still had the position. Unfortunately, I did. And then I remember Andrew joined like 2 weeks before me, maybe, and they were planning the trip to London to meet with Dan and do it like team planning. And I joined just too late for this. So my first week on the team, I was literally by myself.
Like right after the plan, or essentially they
here's
were
a
in
thing
London.
you can work on, and this is the area we set in. And then I spent the first week by myself in the area. So it was very weird.
And this was like down here, Menlo Park, or this was okay.
In the Classic campus.
So like 8-hour time zone difference from London as well.
That was challenging. Yeah. That was challenging.
But this is all crazy to me. So you just identified that virtualized tables was a problem at Treasure Data, and you just went off and just said, I'm gonna go do this.
Yeah.
And then I'm guessing you yak shaved a lot. You kind of iterated a lot. You kind of like how many versions did you go through? Essentially, what version is React Virtualized at today? You don't even know.
I don't remember. I published a point release just a week or two ago to include React 18 in the peer depths, and I don't remember. That's the thing. Like I have so many open source libraries now that I don't. Yeah, I don't know.
Well, that's crazy. So like that experience got you recognized by the folks over at Facebook, the React core team at Facebook.
Yeah.
You mentioned Andrew, lovely person. Dan, lovely person. I love Dan so much. He's also based in London. I'm based in London, and so I see Dan from time to time. Chris Shadow, only say good things about him. Tom Aquino, love that guy. I think he ended up leaving the React team. I'm not sure if he left Meta or did he?
Too, about a year ago.
Yeah. And so I was sad to see him go because he was just such a lovely person and such a kind person to me in the past. But yeah, so like you went to go work on at virtualized stuff at Facebook. Like what happened with that?
Yes, I never built it. So I got there when we were just starting what would eventually be React 16 with this big rewrite. And so there was just this big grid of tests that we did a rewrite in place. We had a bunch of test cases that we ran against both version 15 and version 16.
I remember. I think there was a website like is React 16
Fiber done yet or ready yet or something?
Yeah. And it had like all the different test cases that were passing and then failing. Yeah.
And so the first task I got was I think to build to take and do the React Native renderer. So when you build a React renderer with the reconciler thing, you start with the reconciler package, which has a couple of methods, and then you pass it some configuration objects that can do things like create host components and various things like this. And so, so my first task was to build the React Native version. I'd never worked with React Native before. It's very overwhelming.
The whole React Native architecture is dramatically different than the web architecture.
Yes. I know it better now, but I knew it not at all then. And so that was the start. And then after that, there were a bunch of projects, all sort of in the service of getting React 16 out, and then eventually sort of kind of culminated. I mean, there's still a lot of things ongoing, but I think the 18 release recently was kind of like the culmination of what started then. And there were always other things to work on, and it wasn't until maybe a year ago when we're like, okay, we should now actually start making steps towards doing this virtualization thing. And some of the first parts of that were sort of like building block APIs. So this is the off-screen thing, which you may have heard about. It's like a foundation block for that. Getting the effects stuff. So Luna and I worked on a change a year-ish ago, 2 years? I don't know. It's been a bit. To run in strict mode to sort of mount, unmount, and remount effects to get them sort of ready for a day when you might have something shown and then hidden and shown again. And we want to keep state around. So the component state and the DOM state. And so your components have to be hardened to this fact that it used to be that they would mount once and unmount once, and that's no longer the case. And so like a lot of building blocks to get you to a place where you eventually would do a virtualization thing.
And this fascinates me because again, it's going back to the virtualized topic. Like for me as a React developer, I never think about this. Building a virtualized table. I never think of all those considerations that you've thought about. So like, how do you arrive at even thinking about and solving for these? Is it just a matter of obviously Facebook and Meta operate at such a large scale with so many React developers internally that you kind of just learn from them and kind of just absorb like their problems and try to solve for their problems, or are these things that like the React team just like discreetly thinks about and tries to solve for? Is it a combination of both? Or
I think so. I think that what makes a good open source project really is that you build something you need, and then hopefully if it's something other people need too. But you don't start it from a theoretical standpoint. You have practical problems you're trying to solve. So when I started Virtualized, I had like concrete business cases I needed to fill, and then we expanded it ourselves because we started using it more places. Like for instance, we it's great for our grids and our tables, but like what about these drop downs? Like we have
Oh,
but
yeah.
like why are we rendering hundreds or thousands of things there? And
Yeah.
what if we want to type ahead search in a drop down? And so I wrote an
Oh,
adapter
wow.
for Jed's React Select, which I think is probably still kicking. That there was a React-virtualized select that virtualized the drop-down. And so it's all these use cases, and then as you start to have more cases and people say, well, I want to build this sort of a thing, like non-linear data, but like a lot of it. And so now you need to think of, well, how would I build a component with a lot of XY positioned data where I don't want to render all of it, but I need to be able to like quickly and efficiently jump to like whatever's in this viewpoint. And, like,
Interesting.
you have to tackle this problem. And
Yeah.
So it's just a lot of practical use cases, and then you do redesigns as needed. And I think at Facebook scale, it's the same thing. Honestly, like Facebook scale is not that different than medium, large GitHub open source project scale. You're still getting hundreds of inputs. The only main difference, I guess, is at Facebook, you all can see the same code. Which helps. Because a lot of times you don't.
Like you don't have like a practical, like essentially reproduction to know if your thing is going to work, but you can test it against the Facebook code base and kind of reproduce it on Facebook.
Yeah.
Okay, that's cool. That's interesting. Yeah, but I think fundamentally, as you were saying, you're solving for kind of yourself. You're solving for your own kind of ideas and kind of thesis in a way, and then you kind of hope someone else uses as well. Which, as you said, is kind of the whole kind of mantra of open source. It's kind of like, hey, I built this thing. I'm putting it out there for you. I hope it's helpful for you as well. So like I think that's a pretty good guiding principle there.
Yeah.
And I think that's also a good way to kind of perhaps segue into the next bit of maybe what you've been working on, which is I think the dev tool side, if I'm not mistaken, because
no, it absolutely
like it sounded like a problem that you had. Again, you mentioned before with Angular, kind of debugging and kind of the dev tools experience there was kind of suboptimal. At that point in time, I'm sure it's better now. And kind of with React, it was kind of a similar story. For a long time, debugging React applications were complicated. I mean, like I remember putting a debugger statement in there and then stepping through all of the internals of React, for example, and like that being a challenge. And I'm not even sure if that it still is a challenge, you know. And so, like how did you start, and how did you think about that?
So when I joined the React team, there was a React DevTools that I don't know who wrote it, but there was one that existed, but it had a lot of rough edges that made it difficult. I added a couple of features to it. But it was hard to work with, and it was more importantly though it was slow, and it was so slow that Facebook's like foundational business money-making apps like Ads Manager couldn't use it. Ads Manager is such a large, in terms of the number of components, app that the cost of sort of serializing the tree structure between the web page and the browser extension all has to go through post message, so it's basically JSON serialized. That was so much overhead that it just brought the browser to its knees, and so Ads Manager developers couldn't use it, and so. At some point, I thought, I could rewrite it. Again, another bold claim that it's going to be a lot of work, and then it ends up being way more. But so I rewrote it with a sort of focus on sort of sending minimal amount of information through post message so that it would be faster, and then also sort of flow type it and make it saner to work in general as we add new features. And so that was the first part, and that was really fun because that was an immediate thing that I could roll out to my colleagues at Facebook and say, like, now you can use DevTools. You hadn't been able to, but now you can. And then from there, that led to a bunch of other things. Like as we're working on React 16, one thing that changed was the old React renderer used to work via recursion. And so if you had a problem, you hit a debugger statement and you just step up the call stack and you can, how did I get here? New React doesn't do that because it was written from start with this idea of being able to yield control back to the browser. And so to do that, you have to be able to sort of leave off enough bits to like resume your stack quickly so that there's not a lot of overhead that makes yielding not. The result of this iterative thing was that now if you hit a debugger statement, your stack is only like 5 things deep and it's all React.
Your stack is basically up to the yield. It's not doesn't cross that yield boundary.
Well, even worse, it's not just to the yield. It doesn't even cross to the parent component boundary because we don't recurse through children and we iterate through them. And so like if you're like, oh, well, how did this prop get to me? You got nothing. That's when we started talking about this need for some React-specific performance profiling tools, and that was how the the profiler was.
That's fascinating. There's something that like fascinates me about JavaScript, and I find people don't talk about this enough. But like the way that a JavaScript virtual machine works is it actually executes one straightforward code path. And so if you have a function, it will execute that function. If you have an asynchronous aspect in that function, it actually yields back towards the C++ code, executes that, and then executes a new stack frame at the new function pointer, which is a new stack entirely in JavaScript, because like that's the JavaScript execution, kind of straight line of execution, while yielding frequently back to C++ land. We kind of do work in C++. JavaScript, it's not actually an asynchronous language, which is a weird way of thinking about it. The asynchronicity is provided by the C++ layer. JavaScript itself executes in a straight line. So in order to introduce the concept of async await to JavaScript, the specification team had to introduce the concept of a worker queue, and then that worker queue is basically async awaited in between, and that's how you actually have reentrancy across stack frames, where if you throw within an async await, you're actually able to get the full stack across that async await boundary as well, while previously you weren't because of that kind of like essentially technicality within the JavaScript specification.
Yeah.
But I was fortunate to kind of sit down with a few of those lovely engineers and kind of ask them like, hey, how do you specify async await? Because traditionally that never existed.
So that's
that
a great
concept never
example.
existed.
That's a great example, because when that, as async programming became more common, there was a flaw in a lot of the browser tools, because at first, it used to be that if you set a breakpoint, you would only see up to your timer tick or your network request or something, and that it's similar to the problem I mentioned.
Yep.
And so when the browser vendors started adding, like stitching together the async stacks, with huge quality of life improvement, and there were similar things that were missing for React or frameworks.
Yep.
Similar things that you needed tools to sort of stitch things together and show you, like the component stack and like how props slowed down and why a thing rendered when it rendered, things like that. And so that was identifying those problems was like it's a big part of working on DevTools.
Yeah.
And then also I think going back to the building something for yourself, I think it is easy to get. If you've been working in the tooling cycle or the framework cycle for too long, you start to trend more. You have intuitions, and they're based on experiences in the past, but it's easy to get detached. And then you start building things with like, here's the principles I'm operating on, but then people might say, well, but they don't, what about this? And like, this isn't practical. And so one of the things I've found really helpful is to periodically sit with people and like pick a bug that someone used to do this internally at Facebook. Someone would write on the React support forum internally, and which is kind of like GitHub, but you're more likely to get a response because the noise is a little lower. And then I would just say, hey, you have this bug. Let's look at it together with DevTools, and let's see. Maybe DevTools already is enough to find it, or maybe there's a hole that I don't know about, and then that tells me what I need to like build or change or teach or something.
Yeah.
That was really helpful.
That's awesome. So you've built DevTools.
Yes.
You kind of worked a lot on DevTools.
Yes.
You worked a lot at Meta. You've worked on these kind of, in my opinion, very tricky things to quantify and very tricky things to kind of make understandable to developers and make understand to kind of people as a whole. And I think that's a big reason, essentially, why I appreciate your work, is because at the end of the day, you're kind of helping like a generation of developers kind of succeed in whatever problem space they're trying to tackle. And I think that's super cool in and of itself, between virtualized and obviously DevTools now. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, you've kind of gone on to kind of do more of that now full time. I'm not sure if that's correct.
Yeah, well, I've been doing this full time now for about 6 years, almost 6 years. Actually, about 6 years, because I was kind of doing it even before I joined Facebook. At Treasure Data, at some point, I was kind of doing open source stuff mostly. But yeah, so now I recently left Facebook, Meta. April Fool's Day was when I left. I thought it would be funny, and maybe it was not. And then I joined Replay, which is also a developer tool product. Basically, we are the best way to report and share a bug. So basically, we have a browser that you can use. You hit record, you do some things, you stop, and then you can send a URL, which we give you to someone else, like me as a maintainer, for example. As a maintainer, generally we'll get bug reports, and 80% of them won't have enough information to be actionable to begin with.
Right.
And then you'll sort of winnow it down, and you'll say, okay, what exact URL were you using? Sometimes you can say what browser, what operating system. Tell me the steps you did, and like tell me more about your account and the environment in the background. And then maybe I can repro it. And if I repro it, maybe I can do it consistently, and then I can fix it. But you spend so much time. You maybe spend 80% of your time doing this stuff and 20% actually fixing.
Right.
And so the nice thing about replay is that when I report a bug, because we use replay to build replay, which is fun. I use DevTools to build DevTools and React. But when I see a replay bug, I just hit record, do it, hit save, open a GitHub issue, paste it in, and sometimes I'll do a loom too with me describing what I'm seeing, and that's it. So I can usually, the nice thing as a reporter is it takes me a minute or two, and then I've got a bug report. But the really awesome thing about replay from a maintainer standpoint is that when I get this link, what I can do is open it, and what I have, there's two modes. There's a viewer and a DevTools bug. In the viewer, I just have a time scrubber. I can scrub for it and see what's happening on screen.
Yeah.
But if I go to DevTools, now I've got breakpoints and console logs, and I can evaluate things in the console at points in time. And it is the actual session. So I can see exactly what was on the screen, network requests going in and out, what variables were. I can run code in the console to see, well, what if I'd done this instead? Would it have been different? Because replay records all the low-level I/O information, and so it can literally rebuild the session on the server at a point in time, and it sends it to the client, and the client has everything locally. So it's really awesome because you can learn code you're not familiar with this way because you can step through it, but you can also really quickly share a bug, comment on it, send it back, the person can comment. It's really cool. And I think another thing that's awesome is that it's also really good for noisy things, like working on virtualization, for example. If you're trying to optimize that and you scroll, especially on like Mac OS or something, when you get the sort of the tailing slowdown, that you'll get hundreds or thousands of events, and you can't do anything with that in real time. But in something like replay, you can, because now you can inspect it. You can do it in real time, save it, and then you can step through it very slowly, frame by frame, inspect what the UI looked like at the time, evaluate code, add conditional debug, like conditional logging points and everything, without influencing the behavior that you're trying to record, which is really important for profiling and stuff. So I think it's really exciting. I'm very excited about it.
That like that's kind of insane to me. I mean, the biggest issue when trying to like solve a bug is reproducing that bug. And if you solve reproducing that bug with full debuggability in that reproduction, I mean, that's like that's huge, right? And so cool. Like that's insane. Wow. Wow. Okay. Cool. Well, I look forward to kind of seeing more of that, and I look forward to kind of learning about more of that, and kind of just seeing the next generation of things that you work on, because I think that's so exciting. I mean, I've used Virtualize, I've used DevTools. I look forward to using Replay. That's all super cool, man. So what, you said you used to live in SF, now you're in NYC.
I moved to Brooklyn in October of this past year, so 7 months.
Oh wow, so you came primarily for winter.
Just in time. I had a nice fall, and then it got cold. Myself and the React team were supposed to move there April 2020, and then COVID happened and everything shut down in March, and then everyone scattered. So we meant to be there a long time ago, but then COVID held us up.
I remember my friend Ricky, essentially he was in London, and then COVID happened, and he hopped on the first plane back to New York, and so around that same time frame. So I guess one of the React core team moved over there, and then
we eventually straggled in. Folks, I think Ricky and Sebastian went there earlier on and got some good rental rates because the COVID discounts. And some of us, the rest of us, trickled in over the next year or so. But
are you still on those good COVID rental rates, or did you kind of miss that?
No, I kind of missed it. Some people in my building have because of the max increase per year they can do. Some people that got them are now, their rent is like almost half of mine.
Like so I just learned this amazing trick for getting free rent, which is to build them a website. If you just build them a website.
If it was 2004, that would be the thing to do. Yeah, I will make one more plug for tying the DevTools jobs together. I am super excited about integrating React DevTools and framework-specific stuff into Replay. So right now, you can already React DevTools is already in Replay. It shows you the React tree. You can inspect it and stuff. But what I think is really awesome that needs to be built, that isn't yet built, is after-the-fact profiling, for example. Because just like with, what I think is really exciting is after the fact replay recording too. But that's a little farther down the road. But basically, if you do something, you see a bug, just a way to say, oh, record the last 15 seconds of what happened because I wanted to share that. That's down the road. That would be, that's like the Xbox record the last 30 seconds of this really cool thing I did that I couldn't do again. Something that's closer to that I want to add is if you have a React app that you recorded a session of, and you see a performance problem, for example, mostly they're bugs, but sometimes they're performance problems. You could just open the React profiler and say, oh, show me why this rendered and what was really slow here in this like framework friendly view of it, instead of stepping through the raw sort of iterative stack, which I think is going to be a really nice quality of life improvement for all the folks, especially folks building like meta frameworks like this remix stuff and these other things that we're hearing about.
When he says meta frameworks, he means meta as in meta, not meta as in Facebook. Okay, just wanted to clarify that just for the viewers.
Such a great name choice.
But okay, cool. So like what, like recording the past 15 seconds, and then sorry, that's the second one was.
Well, that's a thing that I think that's farther down the road for replay, but I would like it to be always on so that you can just say like, oh, I did a thing.
Like essentially export the last 15 seconds of that.
Kind of like Xbox does. But but that's down the road farther. But the thing I'm talking about is if you make the replay, like you click record, you do it, you save it, you send it to us. As a maintainer, I can look at it and I can say, well, I've already got breakpoints and console logs, and I've got the React tree, I can inspect it. But what if I want to go back and pretend like I had been profiling in React? Because all the data is there. So I could pull up the profiler and step through commits and see why things rendered in a way that's more React friendly.
I hear you. So because replay is recording the underlying I/O, because it's recording the system,
all the info is there.
you can pull that back up into DevTools or really anything because you have kind of that underlying. Okay, I get you now.
And I'm looking into ways to add React stuff there. Mark recently joined Replay as well. He's looking into ways to add Redux stuff, and so I think there's a lot of nice derivatives.
Mark's another lovely person. I had a great chance of meeting him down in Miami just a few weeks ago. Had a good chance hanging out with him. We were both dying in the heat down there. But he's also one of those like super interesting guys. And I had the pleasure of talking with Jason as well, who I believe is the CEO. And just the way that he thinks about the problem space, the way that he thinks about kind of helping people and developers kind of debug the next generation of tools and applications. I mean, it's just, for me, it's just it just blows my mind having all of these same people kind of working together on these types of things. Like I've never had. I remember debugging JavaScript web apps back in 2001. So I like essentially back then I was an 11-year-old kid and I wanted to make a video game, and I went to htmlgoodies.com, if you remember htmlgoodies.com. And they had a book on there which was JavaScript. And so like for me, not knowing anything about programming, I'm like, I've heard of Java, I've heard of scripting. JavaScript is just scripting in Java, right? And so like that's how I make a video game. And so I downloaded this like 120-page book on JavaScript, and I read through it like page by page by page by page. And I was like, the video game chapter's coming. The video game chapter's going to be the next one. It's coming. The video game chapter never came. It never came. But I remember like trying to like do all those things in browser and kind of like build those things in browser, and it like half the time it didn't work, but like the dev tools back then were terrible. Like the things would just break and I'd have no idea why. I tried to pull up like the console, because there was a dev console, there was nothing else but a console, and even that I had no idea what was going on. And so I'm just remembering like all of the challenges and all of the difficulties I've had building things over the decades. Just something like what you're describing is just mind-blowing to me, and I just can't wait to see it for myself.
Sorry, this fell. JavaScript and frameworks have gotten, and browser APIs have gotten a lot more complex, but I think the improvement in tooling has outpaced that. The tooling has gotten so much better. Like not even saying replay is amazing, but not even that. Just like look at what Chrome or Firefox or these browsers, Edge, have built into them in terms of tooling. It's like mind-blowingly better than what we used to have. So. It is crazy to think back on.
Well, awesome. Well, anyway, I hope you enjoyed our time with Brian. You can we'll post Brian's Twitter and everything down in the description below. And thanks again, Brian, for chatting. It's been a pleasure. As I said, I've known about Brian for a while now, especially through my friend Ricky. And so it's been such a good time kind of meeting you and getting a chance to talk to you. So hope you all enjoyed it as well. All right, we'll see you.